The envelope was ivory, thick, and heavy in a way that felt intentional. My name, Amara Lane, was scrawled in deep gold calligraphy on the front. No return address, no explanation. Just that. I found it in my mailbox one quiet Tuesday morning in November, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. For a moment, I thought it might be from a client. Maybe a holiday card, maybe even something from Leia's school. But then I saw the seal on the back, an embossed rose wrapped in a ribbon, and my stomach dropped before I even broke the wax. I didn't have to open it to know. Still I did. Slowly, deliberately, like peeling the lid off a box you've buried deep underground for years. Inside was a single invitation. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Madison Hale and Daniel Grayson. December 3rd at the Rosebridge Conservatory. I read it once, then again, and again. The name hit like a brick to the chest. Daniel Grayson. My Daniel. My ghost. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since the night he disappeared from our apartment without a goodbye. One moment he was sitting next to me, holding my hand as we stared at the ultrasound photo of the baby we'd lost. The next morning he was gone. No calls, no explanations, just a single note. I can't do this anymore. I need to feel alive again. As if grieving had made me dead. As if I hadn't just watched our future bleed out on a hospital floor. But he hadn't just left me. He'd left Leia too. She wasn't mine. Not by blood. Leia was his daughter from a previous marriage. Her mother had left when she was 4. And when Daniel and I moved in together, Leia came with him, quiet, wide-eyed, and uncertain. But the moment she wrapped her small hand around my finger and whispered, "Can I call you Mommy?" something inside me shifted forever. I stopped being just someone who loved a man. I became someone who loved his child. Fiercely. Completely. As my own. So when Daniel left, Leia stayed. Not by accident. By choice. She was 11. She stood in the doorway holding her tiny suitcase and said, "I want to stay with you." I didn't ask why. I just knelt down and pulled her into my arms and promised her I wouldn't leave, even if he did. And I kept that promise. Even when I had no idea how we'd pay rent. Even when I couldn't afford groceries and got calls from debt collectors daily. Even when I stared into my reflection and didn't recognize the woman looking back. I braided her hair. I packed her lunches. I helped her with homework while hiding the stack of overdue bills under the placemats. And on the nights when I could barely breathe from the weight of being left behind, she knocked on the bathroom door, crawled in beside me, and said, "I made you a sandwich. You forgot to eat." There were days I felt like a ghost floating through my own life. Days I wished I could dissolve into the silence. But she kept me anchored, one peanut butter sandwich at a time. So now, standing in my kitchen with that ivory envelope in my hand, I didn't feel shock. I felt something slower, colder, a kind of nausea that started deep in my gut and worked its way up into my throat. Who sends a wedding invitation to the woman you abandoned? Who decides that out of all the things to say after 3 years of silence, this is the way to reappear? I almost threw it out. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I left it on the counter, untouched for 3 days. Every time I passed it, it whispered to me. A reminder, a taunt, a challenge. And then, one evening, Leia found it. She was 16 now, taller than me, quieter, with eyes that saw through everything. She picked it up, read it aloud without blinking, and looked at me. "You should go," she said. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Why would I put myself through that? So I can see him start his new life with someone younger, prettier, wealthier. "No," she said softly. "So he sees what he lost." That made me stop. She wasn't talking about him. Not really. She was talking about me. The me I used to be. The me I had forgotten. The me that still hurt quietly and still showed up anyway. And maybe it was time he saw her, too. The week after Daniel left, the silence in our apartment was unbearable. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that hums like an engine beneath the floor, a silence you can't turn off. It clung to the walls, to the bed sheets, to the inside of my mouth. Every breath I took felt like a reminder that the life I'd built wasn't real anymore, just a leftover echo in a space too large for one person to fill. But I wasn't alone. Leia was still there, small, quiet, and too perceptive for her age. She didn't ask where her father had gone. She just watched me, watched how I moved slower, how my eyes stayed red longer, how my voice trembled when I said goodnight. And then one night, when the electricity was off because I forgot to pay the bill, I found her in the kitchen lighting candles and cutting an apple in half. She smiled and said, "Let's pretend we're camping." I almost broke. We survived on peanut butter, tap water, and the memory of stability. I took freelance jobs wherever I could, websites for small businesses, poster designs, social media ads, anything. There were nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. fixing client logos, then woke up at 6 to make Leia breakfast and walk her to school. I told myself this was temporary, that I just needed time. But time moved like molasses when you're grieving and broke. Some mornings, I would forget to brush my hair. Other days, I wore the same shirt for 3 days straight because laundry soap was low on the priority list. I stopped answering texts. I stopped picking up calls unless the number was unfamiliar. Even then, 9 times out of 10, it was a debt collector reminding me that Daniel had taken the savings account when he left. All of it. I remember one evening, sitting on the bathroom floor with the water running. Not because I was showering, but because I didn't want Leia to hear me cry. My body shook, so hard I thought I might shatter. My chest burned. My arms were numb. The grief didn't come in sobs anymore. It came in waves of paralysis, like being underwater with no air in sight. Then a knock. Leia opened the door slowly, careful not to scare me. She was 10, barely up to my ribs. She sat down beside me with a paper plate in her hands. On it was a peanut butter sandwich, cut in half. "You forgot to eat," she said, placing it gently in my lap. I don't know what broke me more, the kindness or the fact that she noticed. I pulled her into me and held her tighter than I ever had. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just surviving with me. She was holding me together. After that night, I started therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in grief and abandonment. The sessions were hard, ugly even, but I showed up, week after week. I stopped lying to myself about being okay. I told the truth, that I was angry, that I was tired, that I was ashamed of how broken I felt. And little by little, the weight started to lift, not all at once, but enough to breathe. I downsized. We moved into a smaller apartment near Leia's school. I painted the walls soft green, bought secondhand furniture, and taped her art to the fridge. I got a used car that stalled in the cold but ran well enough. I said yes to more clients. I charged higher rates. I set boundaries. I laughed again. Real laughter, not the kind that stings when it ends. And through it all, Leia never wavered. She learned how to make pasta. She reminded me to take breaks. She told me when a client was being unfair and not to let them steamroll your worth. She stood beside me not just as a child, but as a witness to my rebuilding. And in doing so, she helped rebuild me too. We didn't talk about Daniel much. Sometimes his name would slip out during a story, a memory, a mention of an old restaurant we used to go to, but mostly he faded, the way a person does when they choose absence over effort, the way silence becomes a language in itself. And yet, I kept the ultrasound photo, tucked deep inside my desk drawer, wrapped in an old scarf. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't throw it away either, because even if the future I imagined had been erased, some part of it still lived in the choices I made every day. We survived. We adapted. We grew. And then, one day, without warning, came the envelope, the golden letters, the wedding. And I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the middle. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for a full week before I touched it again. Every time I walked past it, I felt a tightening in my chest, like my lungs were trying to close in on themselves. Some nights I'd catch myself just staring at it, wondering who had really sent it. Was it Madison? Daniel? Some petty friend of his who thought pain made for a good punchline? I never found out, but deep down I knew what it was. A message, not an invitation. A message to remind me that I'd been replaced, that he'd found happiness without me, that I was disposable. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I had nothing to prove, that I'd already healed, or at least healed enough. But the truth was, healing doesn't always come in silence. Sometimes it demands confrontation. Sometimes it asks you to sit in the fire without burning. I left the envelope untouched until one night, Leah came home from school and saw it still sitting there. She didn't say anything at first, just walked past, set her backpack down, and opened the fridge. But a few minutes later, as she stirred leftover soup on the stove, she finally asked, "Are you going?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I was wiping down the kitchen counter, pretending to be busy. To what? She didn't flinch. The wedding. My fingers tightened around the sponge. "It's not a wedding," I muttered. "It's a performance." "So," she said, ladling soup into 2 bowls, "that doesn't mean you shouldn't be there." I turned to her, surprised by the calm in her voice. Why would I want to see him marry someone else? After what he did, after everything. Leah set the bowls on the table and sat across from me. "Because it's not about him." I scoffed. "Then what is it about?" "It's about you," she said. "Showing up, taking up space, not hiding anymore." I stared at her, 16 years old, wise beyond anything I'd ever been at her age. She didn't blink, didn't smile. She just looked at me like she'd already decided something, and I was the one who needed to catch up. And maybe she was right. For 3 years, I'd been shrinking myself, quieting my grief, smiling just enough so people wouldn't ask questions. I'd learned how to survive in the cracks, but I'd forgotten how to stand tall in the light. Maybe this was my chance to do that, not for Daniel, not for Madison, not for revenge, but for the woman I used to be, the one who loved fearlessly, who braided a little girl's hair every morning while the world fell apart. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll go." Leah nodded, as if she'd known I would. "I already picked out your dress." I blinked. "You what?" She grinned, the first real grin in days. "I borrowed it from Aunt Mel. Navy blue. Classy. Makes your eyes look sharp." I laughed. A small, uncertain laugh, but a real one. "You're bossy." She shrugged. "I've had a good teacher." I should have known she'd planned this. Leah had always been the quiet kind of observant, the kind that noticed cracks and smiles and meaning behind silences. She wasn't just encouraging me to go. She was preparing me for it. Like she knew that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. Uncle Malcolm, of course, agreed to drive us. He didn't ask many questions, he never did, but when I told him, his jaw tightened just slightly. "He's still a jackass then," he muttered. I didn't argue. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror for nearly 20 minutes before putting on the dress. It was simple, but elegant, navy knee-length with sleeves that hugged just right. I hadn't worn heels in almost a year, but I slipped them on anyway. They made me feel taller, grounded, like I could face anything, even if I trembled the whole time. In the hallway, Leah wore her catering uniform, black slacks, crisp white shirt, hair tied back. She looked like a professional, but when she saw me, her face softened. "You look strong." I smiled. "I feel terrified." "Same thing," she said, handing me my coat. We didn't speak much in the car. The conservatory was 40 minutes away, nestled on the edge of a frozen lake. As we pulled up, the glass roof shimmered under the pale winter sun. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Like a fairy tale, desperately trying to convince itself it was real. I stepped out slowly, heels clicking on the stone driveway. Uncle Malcolm gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "You're doing great," he said before heading off to park. Leah gave me a look that said everything, "Don't flinch." And I didn't. Not even when I saw Daniel through the window, laughing beside a woman with golden hair and a dress that sparkled like it belonged in a bridal magazine. Not even when every part of me whispered to turn around, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't here for him. I was here for me. The Rosebridge Conservatory looked like something out of a magazine. Glass ceilings arching above imported orchids, candles floating in crystal bowls, a live string quartet playing soft classical pieces in the corner. The kind of place built to impress or to distract. I walked slowly through the lobby, each step sinking a little deeper into plush carpet as the murmurs of guests swirled around me. People in designer suits and glittering heels, laughter that sounded just a bit too bright, and that polished, practiced hospitality that comes when people are trying too hard to look like they belong. I saw Daniel before he saw me. He stood near the bar, wearing a tailored black tuxedo and his signature smirk, the one he always wore when he was charming a crowd. That smirk used to be magnetic. Now it felt like an act I'd already seen too many times, one I'd stopped applauding long ago. Then I saw her, Madison Hale. White silk hugged her frame like she'd been poured into it. Her hair was spun gold, cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She was laughing, loudly, too loudly, at something someone had said, clutching Daniel's arm like a trophy. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every smile too sharp, too white. She looked like she belonged in a bridal catalog, or maybe just on stage. Leia had already vanished into the catering prep area. She hadn't said much on the way in, just gave me a wink and disappeared through the staff entrance like she belonged there. She'd insisted it was just a job, but I knew her better. She wasn't here to serve hors d'oeuvres. She was here to protect me in the quiet, fierce way she always had. Uncle Malcolm was seated near the back, just where we agreed. When he saw me enter, he gave a small nod. That was all I needed. A silent, grounding presence that said, "You're doing fine, even if it feels like hell." I slipped into the chair beside him and folded my hands tightly in my lap. My fingers wouldn't stop moving. I stared at the chandelier, the floral centerpieces, the embroidered tablecloths. Anything but the altar. But eventually I had to look. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The guests rose. And then Madison walked down the aisle like she owned the air itself. She beamed at Daniel with such theatrical devotion that it made my stomach twist. He didn't flinch. He didn't stumble. He recited his vows like he was reading from a teleprompter. Smooth, rehearsed, sterile. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I just bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, because for all the years I spent picking up the pieces of his life, I wasn't even a footnote in this one. The applause was loud. The kiss was dramatic. The photographers snapped a dozen shots in rapid succession. I felt like I was watching someone else's movie, the kind you already know the ending to, but you can't look away. Then came the reception. Waiters flowed like choreography. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter echoed across the marble floors. I sipped water, quiet, still, trying to make my body small enough to disappear. Leia passed by once, carrying a tray of bruschetta. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. She winked. That was enough. Then came the toasts. The best man went first, talking about Daniel's resilience, his loyalty, his sense of humor. I almost laughed. Almost. The maid of honor followed, gushing about Madison's heart, her kindness, her unwavering grace. And then Madison herself stood up, holding her glass high, and everything changed. "I want to say something," she said, her voice sparkling like her earrings. When I met Daniel, he was healing. He'd been through something painful. Someone had hurt him, damaged him, left him with scars. But I saw the real him, the man he could be if he was loved right. People chuckled softly. A few nodded. I felt my hands go cold. "He was broken when I found him," she continued, a smile tugging at her lips. "But I saved him. I healed him. And now he's finally whole." It was subtle, just a shift in the air. But I felt it. like the moment before a storm breaks, like the hush before lightning splits the sky. Every part of me was screaming, stand up, say something, throw your glass. But I didn't move, because the moment wasn't mine. It was hers. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement near the kitchen. One of the waitresses had stopped walking. Her jaw was tight, her fists clenched, and then she stepped forward toward the center of the room. Slowly, like she was walking through water. Leia. She removed her cap, held it in one hand, and raised her voice loud enough to slice through every clink of crystal and polished laugh in the room. "I'm his daughter," she said, "and I have something to say." Every sound in the ballroom stopped. Forks froze midair. Laughter turned into stunned silence. People turned in their seats, necks craning toward the young girl in the black apron and white button-up shirt now standing alone beside the dance floor. Leia's hands were steady, but her chest rose and fell like she was pulling breath from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Her curls had loosened from the bun she pinned that morning. Her eyes, sharp, brown, unflinching, were locked on the bride. "I'm his daughter," she said again, louder this time. "From before you. From before he pretended we didn't exist." Madison's smile didn't fall. It shattered. I watched it break apart across her face like thin porcelain. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Just silence. Pure, sharp silence. Daniel turned in his chair. Slow, mechanical. His face was pale, slack. He looked at Leia like a stranger had walked in wearing his past. "She's not just the woman you mocked," Leia said, voice cracking slightly. "She's the woman who raised me." A gasp rippled through the room. Someone near the front covered their mouth. A waiter froze, tray hovering in midair. "I was 11 when he left," Leia continued. "He didn't just leave her. He left me. No calls, no letters, no goodbye. Just gone." She turned to the crowd. "But you all cheered when she called her broken, when she said she saved him. Like none of you stopped to ask what that meant." Her eyes locked onto Madison. "Did you ever ask him about me? About the kid he left behind? Or did you just like the version of the story where he was the victim?" Madison blinked rapidly, her lips parting, but still no words. "I watched her cry in the bathroom at night, so I wouldn't see," Leia said, her voice rising. "I watched her skip meals to buy me shoes. I watched her rebuild both our lives from nothing while he pretended we didn't exist." Daniel stood up. "Leia, not here." "Oh," she said, sharp and bitter. "Now you remember my name?" He took a step toward her, but she didn't back down. "When I sent birthday cards, they came back unopened. When I emailed you, I got no reply. Not even a block. Just ignored." She pointed toward me. "And now you let someone stand in front of a room and call her trash." He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something crack. Not just guilt, not just fear, but recognition of what he'd done, of who he'd left. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. "She didn't break you," Leia said, turning back toward the room. "You broke yourself, and then you buried us." The silence was thunderous. Madison finally found her voice. This is crazy. She's trying to ruin our wedding." "You ruined it," Leia said, cool and even, "the second you built it on a lie." Then she turned toward me, hand outstretched. I stood. I didn't even think. My fingers reached for hers like they always had. Familiar, steady. In that simple gesture, something in me that had been dormant for years began to stir. Not rage, not bitterness, power. "She didn't come here to fight," Leia said to the crowd. "She came because I asked her to, because I wanted her to see that she doesn't have to hide anymore." She looked at Madison again, straight into her soul. "She doesn't need an invitation to belong in any room. She belongs because she survived it, and no one gets to rewrite our story to make themselves look better. The ballroom held its breath. Madison clutched her champagne glass with trembling fingers, blinking like a camera flash had gone off in her eyes. And then, in a voice that barely held itself together, she said, "This is my wedding. You can't just hijack it." Leia tilted her head. "Then maybe next time, don't marry a man with ghosts you refuse to see." We turned, and the crowd parted. No one stopped us. No one dared. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice once more, quiet, desperate. "Leia," but she didn't turn. She just held my hand tighter and walked on, leaving the weight of every lie behind her. We hadn't made it halfway down the corridor when a voice snapped behind us, sharp, high-pitched, and cracking under its own weight. "Wait!" We stopped. It was Madison. She came stumbling out of the ballroom like someone chasing a dropped lie, her dress swishing around her legs like tangled netting. Her perfect curls bounced with each uneven step, but the perfection ended there. Her face, once luminous and polished, was now smeared with mascara and blotchy from heat. Her hands trembled as she pointed at us. "You can't just do that," she said, breathless. "You can't just hijack my wedding and humiliate us." Leia turned first. "Calm. Steady. Us." Madison blinked. "You could have handled this privately." "No," I said, stepping forward before Leia could. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You could have handled it privately. But instead, you stood in a room full of strangers and called me broken, as if I was a cautionary tale you'd triumphed over." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "I didn't know," she said, weaker now. "I didn't know he had a daughter." "Did you ask?" Leia's voice was like glass, thin, sharp, and unshakable. "Or did you just like the version where you were the savior?" Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Then Daniel appeared behind her. His tie was undone, his jacket unbuttoned. He looked different, not composed, not confident, just exposed. The mask had fallen, and underneath was a man who had run too far and finally ran out of road. "Leia," he said again, this time softer, "I never meant for this to happen." She turned to him slowly, her shoulders squared, chin high. "Which part?" she asked. "Me being born? You abandoning me? Or standing there while someone else tried to erase everything I am?" He flinched. "I thought I was protecting you." "By disappearing," she snapped. "You didn't protect me. You erased me." Then he looked at me. For the first time since we'd arrived, his eyes finally found mine. I was broken, Amara," he said quietly. "You know I was." I didn't deny it. "I was too," I said, "but I didn't leave." The air changed between us. The tension didn't spike, it settled. The truth had been laid down so simply, so cleanly, that it didn't need decoration. There was no argument left to make, no way to spin it. He ran. I stayed. "I can't take it back," he whispered. "No," I replied, "you can't." Then Leia spoke again, but this time her voice softened. "You know what I used to tell myself," she said, stepping closer. "That maybe something happened to you. That maybe you died. Because it was easier to imagine you were gone than to believe you were alive and just didn't care." Daniel's face crumpled. His mouth opened, closed. He looked down at his shoes, the floor, the trail of his choices. But what came next, none of us expected. Leia stepped closer again. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you." His head shot up. You do." "Not for you," she said. "For me. Because carrying your absence has been exhausting. And I'm done." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "You're incredible, you know that?" She turned slightly, pointing at me. "I know. She made me that way." And in that moment, a new silence fell, not heavy like shame, but still like peace, like something sacred had just been named aloud. Madison stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes darting. "So what now? You just walk away and pretend none of this happened?" Leia tilted her head. "No, We walk away and let you sit in what you built." And I added, "If you wanted a perfect story, you should have picked someone with nothing to hide." Neither of them said another word. We turned, walked toward the exit. Outside, the sky had begun to drizzle, a soft, silver rain that painted the sidewalks like watercolor. But we didn't run for cover. The storm we just walked through wasn't falling from the sky. It had already passed. Uncle Malcolm was waiting by the car. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at Daniel, still standing in the entryway, and gave us a slow, proud nod. "Well," he muttered as we opened the door, "guess that's what you'd call a mic drop." Leah laughed. I laughed with her. Not bitter, not forced. Real. For the first time in a long time, real. We didn't speak much on the drive home. The rain tapped gently against the car windows, a soft percussion that filled the silence with something almost comforting. Leah leaned her head against the glass, watching the blur of headlights and empty streets pass us by. I sat beside her, hands folded in my lap, feeling light. Not happy, not relieved, just light, because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. When we got home, Leah headed straight for the shower. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the faint ring on the counter where that ivory envelope used to sit. The invitation was long gone, but its echo still lingered, not as a wound, but as a marker of where something had ended and something else had begun. The next morning, the world began to catch up. It didn't happen in headlines. It didn't make the papers, but it was everywhere, quietly, discreetly, unstoppably. Grainy phone videos started popping up online. One labeled, "Waitress shuts down bride's insult with epic speech." Another, "Bride gets humbled at own wedding." There was no audio in some clips, but you didn't need it. You could see the fear in Madison's face, the stillness in Daniel's, the fire in Leah's, and the woman in the navy blue dress standing silently beside her. Me. I didn't post them. I didn't need to. The truth has a funny way of traveling on its own. People messaged me, friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some apologized for losing touch after Daniel left. Others just said, "You were so brave." But I didn't feel brave. Not at the wedding. Not when Madison mocked me. And not even when Leah stood up and shattered the script. I felt like someone who had finally stopped trying to disappear. I never heard from Daniel again. No follow-up call. No letter. No long-winded attempt to explain himself. And honestly, I don't think he had anything left to say. His story had already been written. Not in the vows he recited, not in the lies he told, but in the silence that followed his departure. That was his chapter, and we were done reading it. As for Madison, her name made the rounds in gossip circles for a few weeks. Enough to bruise. Enough to remind her that pretending someone doesn't exist doesn't erase them. It just postpones the reckoning. I heard from someone at the venue that she left the reception early. Said she wasn't feeling well. But I know better. The truth doesn't just hurt. It lingers. It settles in your bones. And when spoken clearly, it echoes. A month later, Leah showed me a podcast teaser. Madison's voice. For girls who think they don't have a voice. The irony made me laugh. Leah just shook her head. "Let her talk," she said. "Everyone saw the video. They know the real story." And she was right. But what stayed with me, what mattered more than viral clips or whispered rumors, was something that happened on a completely ordinary Tuesday night. I was doing the dishes. Leah was sitting at the kitchen counter, flipping through her notebook, her legs swinging off the stool like she had when she was younger. There was music playing softly from my phone. Some old jazz track we both liked but never remembered the name of. And then out of nowhere she said, "I used to wish my real mom had stayed." I froze, my hand still in the soapy water. My heart clenched. "But now I get it," she continued, voice softer. "Maybe she had to go so I could find you." I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't, because that was it. The moment. The one I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Not applause. Not revenge. Not an apology. Just this. A kitchen. A daughter. A truth. I dried my hands. Sat beside her. Rested my forehead gently against hers. You saved me, I whispered. No, she said. You saved us. And in that moment, I understood something that had taken me years to name. That the strongest love stories aren't always romantic. Some are built in silence, in healing, in showing up when it's hard. Some are born the moment a child chooses to protect the person who never stopped protecting them. And that's what we had. A story built not on vows, but on survival. Winter melted into spring. The snow outside our windows began to recede, slowly revealing patches of earth beneath. Leia started hanging her coat on the lower hook by the door again. I switched out our cinnamon candles for citrus. Life didn't change all at once, but it moved. Quietly, steadily, like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how to inhale without shuddering. I started writing again. Not for work, not for clients, just for me. I opened a blank document one morning and typed out the words I hadn't been able to say out loud for years. I was left. But I am not what was left behind. It wasn't a memoir or a blog. It was more like a letter to anyone who had ever been silenced by someone else's story. I posted a short essay on a local women's platform. Nothing dramatic, just honesty. About being left. About being invisible. About coming back to yourself, one tiny act at a time. To my surprise, people responded. Not in thousands, but enough. Enough women who said, me too. Enough who said, I thought I was the only one. And that was more than enough. One woman sent me a photo of her kitchen table covered in bills and a peanut butter sandwich. Your daughter reminded me of mine, she wrote. She fed me when I didn't have the strength to feed myself. I printed that photo, framed it, put it above my desk, because healing doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like survival with buttered bread. We still didn't talk about Daniel much. Sometimes his name would slip out in stories. Sometimes Leia would ask about a song he used to play, but mostly he faded, not because we pushed him out, but because we no longer needed to carry the shape of his absence in our daily breath. And Madison? She eventually launched her podcast. I listened to one episode, just one. She talked about reclaiming narratives and choosing joy. I didn't feel anger. I didn't roll my eyes. I just closed the app. Some people need to perform closure. Others just live it. One evening, Leia and I were out walking. Something we'd started doing together on Sundays, no phones, no distractions. She was talking about college applications, about maybe majoring in psychology. I asked why, and she said, I think I want to help people feel seen, like you did for me. I stopped, turned to her. You make me proud every day, I said. She smiled without looking at me. I know. And she did. That night, as we walked home, the sky was wide above us, dark but not heavy. The stars came out slowly, blinking into view like they'd been waiting for an audience. Leia reached for my hand and didn't let go. She didn't need to. I wasn't walking ahead anymore, and she wasn't walking behind. We were walking side by side. Later, as I curled into bed, I thought about how easy it would have been to let that wedding rewrite our history, to let a single woman's speech define who I had been. But truth doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who keeps showing up. If you're listening to this now, if you've ever been the one who got left, overlooked, or erased, know this. You are not broken because someone walked away. You are not worthless because someone couldn't recognize your worth. You're still here, and that's everything. Because strength doesn't always look like a comeback speech or a viral moment. Sometimes it looks like making lunch for a child you didn't give birth to and hearing her, years later, call you mom. Sometimes it looks like walking into a room where no one wanted you and leaving as the only one who told the truth. And sometimes it looks like choosing silence, not because you're afraid to speak, but because your story already speaks for itself. That is how we ended. Not with applause, not with revenge, just with truth and love and the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, only heals.